Now there are even plans to expropriate Russian assets. So neither the EU nor Germany are at war with Russia. This expropriation is an act of theft, illegal under international law. The European Union's standing as a financial center for foreign capital will be massively damaged by this. And it is also a slap in the face for all Germans, considering the decision to use German taxpayers' money for these guarantees. So if Russia were to be rightfully awarded compensation for this act of aggression, then once again only the Germans would have to pay the price.
And therefore we are increasing the pressure on Russia with an immense with a tremendous commitment, with new sanction packages from the European Union. These particularly affect the greater Russian war economy. Therefore, this House has decided to allocate 11.5 billion euros in the upcoming budget for the bilateral military support of Ukraine. And that is why we have already invested 700 million euros in Pearl, in NATO's joint procurement mechanism, through which urgently needed American weapons can be quickly acquired for Ukraine. And that is also why we are intensively focusing on diplomacy. And the federal chancellor has put his full political weight behind it to achieve a unified position for Ukraine and its Western partners and supporters. And the summit the summit that took place here in Berlin on Monday has brought us truly decisive steps forward. The results are clear. Firstly, it has become clear that no decisions regarding Ukraine and European security should be made without the involvement of Europeans and Ukraine. Also, no conditions for ending the war must be imposed on Ukraine from outside. Secondly, it is clear that Europe stands united. This message was also particularly strengthened by the fact that this time, and this was especially important to the Chancellor and the federal government, other heads of state and government were also represented. And thirdly, it has become much clearer after the Berlin summit what each side is prepared to put on the table. As the largest and economically strongest country in the EU, we can and must and will clearly and visibly assume responsibility alongside others. And of course, that was also the subject of discussions with the Americans and the Ukrainians. On Sunday and Monday, the multinational force will operate under certain conditions. First and foremost, it is understood by everyone in this chamber that the essential parliamentary procedures are adhered to. Secondly, that a negotiated settlement is achieved, one that makes this kind of peacekeeping truly possible in the first place. And thirdly, that even with the multinational force, there will be no transatlantic divergence, that the Americans, therefore, will provide the necessary contributions and support here.
I would like to take this opportunity to briefly address my previous speaker who did not give me the opportunity to ask a question. And I also know why, because the previous speaker was unable to explain, even in the committee, how the security guarantees from the German side are actually to be designed. They have staged a huge spectacle here in Berlin, and they themselves don't know how they want to shape their security guarantees. This is truly about deception, trickery, and staging a performance. There's nothing to it. Yesterday, I questioned the Chancellor here in this house whether German soldiers should be sent to Ukraine as a security guarantee. And Friedrich Merz was unable to answer this question, not because it is a difficult question, as he tried to make us all believe. It is, in fact, a very simple question. However, the wrong answer to this specific question can have very serious consequences. Friedrich Merz simply and quite plainly tactically ducked away. For everyone is perfectly aware of this fact. Of course, Merz, the master of evasion, wants to keep open the option of sending German soldiers into Ukraine. Merz's evasiveness, however, stands in a rather strange contradiction to his very own rhetoric of escalation. The federal chancellor has publicly ordered and explicitly threatened to return fire on Russian soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, this will not happen on the Oder, nor on the Rhine, and absolutely not in the Lüneburg Heath. If German soldiers return fire, then the place of that retaliation will be the Russian-Ukrainian front line, right in the middle of the war zone. And that, dear CDU, that is not responsible politics. What you are doing here is what we would describe as a creeping entry into war. And Merz is avoiding an honest answer because he knows what he will unleash with it, because he knows what Mr. Zelensky actually demanded in these so-called negotiations here in Berlin. And we are explicitly warning you today. Whoever sends boots, they will also get coffins returned. And this government, it is not concerned with national defense. This government is also not about defending its people and homeland. This government is intent on sacrificing German lives and German blood for the sake of Ukraine. And we want to make it absolutely clear to you, you will not get our sons for this. This war should have been confronted from the very beginning, guided by interest, not by values. That would have been your responsibility, and that is why I will tell you who should bear the main burden of these security guarantees to Ukraine. Germany owes Ukraine neither human lives nor military assistance.
And there's one crucial point we must finally address with honesty in this debate. While European governments are busy assuring each other of their consistent action against the Kremlin, Putin's wealthy supporters in Germany are still diligently stashing away their fortunes. Even today, billions of euros can be concealed within offshore constructions, and aggressive wars are being co-financed, all thanks to countless loopholes. The federal government has absolutely no interest whatsoever in making these ownership structures transparent.
That undermines their credibility and is despicable.
The EU and Germany should position themselves as actors for peace.
Mistakes are being made by Merz, by the European Union, and indeed by Germany itself. And that is precisely why we are seeing no real success here in Europe. And now one hears increasingly often, for instance, even from the foreign minister, the assertion that Putin must not be rewarded. Well, and such a statement, frankly, reveals the full extent of our diplomatic failure. When we are making efforts to bring a war to an end, it's not the moral assessment that is important, but instead the stopping of the loss of life. Moralizing while accepting deaths, that is anything but moral, ladies and gentlemen. And now there are even plans to expropriate Russian assets. So neither the EU nor Germany are at war with Russia. This expropriation is an act of theft, illegal under international law. The European Union, standing as a financial center for foreign capital, will be massively damaged by this. And it is also a slap in the face for all Germans, considering the decision to use German taxpayers' money for these guarantees. So if Russia were to be rightfully awarded compensation for this act of aggression, then once again only the Germans would have to pay the price. But the federal government and the foreign minister, they are completely indifferent to this. The foreign minister himself even formulated it this way: German interests no longer count. Slava Ukraini, that is what's more important to them. Even the biggest terrorist attack against Nord Stream and our energy supply, the federal government simply accepts it. German money, among other things, fills the pockets of corrupt politicians in Ukraine. All of this is completely irrelevant to the federal government and the established parties. But whoever acts this way does not act in the name of the German people. And the Wall Street Journal has already published articles describing our energy policy as the world's dumbest, but now the world's most foolish foreign policy is also being added to the situation. We are imposing sanctions that primarily cause damage to our own interests. Siemens, for example, is pulling out, and General Electric is moving into Russia. Now they're taking over the business, and this can only be described as the world's dumbest foreign policy.
And one thing must also be clearly stated. Ultimately, Ukraine alone decides its own destiny and future. That is not negotiable. And that is why we, together with Ukraine, must always repeatedly draw attention to fundamental points. Firstly, no one, absolutely no one, can seriously expect Ukraine to reduce its military to such an extent that its security would essentially depend on trusting third parties. History and the present teach us that peace without credible security guarantees and without serious, self-reliant deterrence remains fragile.
Peace is a delicate state that must be protected.
Secondly, if the Russian side consistently declares that it is not prepared to make any territorial concessions whatsoever, then that is a truly grotesque distortion of the actual state of affairs. Russia is waging a war of aggression, and it is no concession to want to retain the spoils of its own aggression. Thirdly, and this must also be clearly stated, Ukraine's mere willingness to accept a de facto border along the current front line would already be a concession, a painful concession. Anyone who ignores or downplays this is fundamentally distorting the realities. Yes, a key part of the final declaration also involves a multinational troop presence, led by Europe. But the sequence of these steps will naturally only occur after the war has concluded and as part of a comprehensive peace agreement with Russia. Unfortunately, there are still many steps that need to be taken before we even get to that point, and no one can truly guarantee a swift and lasting peace. What Germany, however, can certainly guarantee is its unwavering commitment to continue taking on responsibility.